The ship was dying. Sci-Fi Cora could feel it in the vibrations that ran through the Ark ship's walls. The great vessel that carried the last of her people groaned and shuddered as it drifted through the cold darkness of space. Warning lights pulsed in soft blue patterns across every corridor. The crystal engines, which had burned bright for 300 years, now flickered like candles in the wind. She stood at the observation window and watched the stars spin slowly past. Somewhere behind them, far beyond the reach of their sensors now, their sun had died. It had swelled red and angry, then collapsed into itself, swallowing their homeworld and everything they had ever known. 40,000 Velith had escaped on this ship. 40,000 out of billions. And now even those 40,000 might not survive. The ship's elder, a tall crystalline being named Morith Ven, approached her. His body caught the dim light and scattered it into rainbows across the floor. But his glow was weak. They were all weak. The ship's systems were failing, and without power, the Velith could not maintain their forms. They would crack. They would shatter. They would die. "We have found something," Morith Ven said. His voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "A small world. Blue and green. It has what we need." Sci-Fi Cora turned to look at him. "What do we need?" "Selenite. The mineral that powers our drives. This world has it in abundance." He paused, and something like shame crossed his ancient face. "But the world is not empty. There are creatures there. Primitive ones. They build with stone and mud. They have not yet learned to fly." Sci-Fi Cora understood what he was not saying. They could simply take what they needed. These creatures would not be able to stop them. The Velith had weapons that could level mountains. They could harvest the selenite, repair their ship, and leave this small, blue world as if they had never been there at all. It would be easy. It would also be wrong. "Show me these creatures," she said. Images that appeared on the screen showed small beings covered in soft skin. They walked on two legs. They gathered in groups near water. They laughed and argued and held their children close. They were so fragile, so temporary. Their lives would flicker by in the blink of a Velith eye. But they were alive. They felt pain and joy and fear. They mattered. "We will ask," Sci-Fi Cora said firmly. "We will not take." Morith Ven bowed his head. "As you wish." The Ark ship descended through clouds and mist until it hovered above a small village by the sea. The humans, for that is what they called themselves, scattered at first, screaming and hiding in their homes. Mothers grabbed children. Men grabbed spears. They looked up at the massive crystal ship with terror in their eyes. Sci-Fi Cora went down alone. She made herself as small and soft as she could. She moved slowly. She held out her hands, empty and open, showing that she carried no weapons. The humans watched her with wide eyes. Some threw stones. The stones passed through her crystal body without harm, but she did not react with anger. She simply waited. Days passed. The Velith remained patient. They did not move aggressively. They did not take anything. They simply waited for the humans to understand that they meant no harm. Finally, an old man emerged from the largest hut. He walked with a stick, his back bent with age. But his eyes were sharp and curious. He approached Sci-Fi Cora without fear. Through gestures and drawings in the sand, they began to communicate. It took weeks. The Ark ship's systems grew weaker every day. Many Velith urged Sci-Fi Cora to simply take what they needed and leave. But she refused, and then something remarkable happened. The old man understood. He understood that these strange crystal beings needed help. He understood that they were dying. And he understood that they had chosen to ask instead of take. He called his people together. He spoke to them in his rough language, pointing at the Velith, pointing at the ground, pointing at his own heart. And when he finished, The humans of the village began to work. They dug for the selenite. They carried it in baskets to the Velos ship. They worked through day and night, sweating and straining, even though they did not fully understand why these materials mattered. They gave freely because they had been asked kindly, but they gave more than just minerals. When the Veloth engineers came down to collect the selenite, the humans offered them food. The Veloth did not eat, but they accepted the gifts with gratitude. When some of the Veloth showed signs of damage and weakness, the humans brought water and soft claws, trying to help in any way they could. One Veloth, an elder named Torah, had been badly injured during the escape from their homeworld. His crystal form was cracked and dim. He could barely move. The humans looked at him with such sadness in their eyes. A young girl, no more than 10 summers old, approached him. Her name was Mira. She had dark hair and bright eyes full of kindness. She sat beside Torathsel and spoke to him softly, even though he could not understand her words. She brought him flowers. She sang to him. She stayed with him through the cold nights. Torathsel did not recover. His wounds were too deep. But when he finally faded, there was peace in his light. He had not died alone. He had not died afraid. A small human child had given him comfort in his final days. Selevkor watched all of this with wonder. These creatures lived such short lives. They had so little. Their world was harsh and dangerous. And yet they shared what they had with strangers from the stars. They showed kindness when they had every reason to show fear. When the Ark ship was finally repaired, Selevkora knew she could not leave without giving something in return. But what could the Veloth offer these primitive people? Technology they could not understand. Weapons they would use to destroy each other? No, she would give them something better. She created a memory stone. It was small enough to fit in a human hand, but inside it contained everything. The coordinates of the Veloth's new colony, a message of gratitude and a promise. Should these humans ever reach the stars, the Veloth would welcome them. The debt would be remembered. Say, Leth Korra gave the stone to Myra, the little girl who had comforted Torathsel. She pressed it into the child's small hands and spoke words that Mira could not understand but somehow felt in her heart. "Find us," Seleth Korra said. "When you are ready, find us. We will remember what you have done." The Ark ship rose into the sky and vanished among the stars. Myra kept the stone her entire life. When she died, it was buried with her. Generations passed. The village grew into a city, then crumbled into ruins. The stone was lost beneath layers of dirt and time. But the Veloth had not lied. They remembered, and 3,000 years later, humanity would prove that they remembered too. Dr. Yusuf Okonkwo wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the object in his hands. He had been digging in the ruins for 3 months. He had found pottery, bones, and the remains of ancient walls. But nothing like this. The stone was small, no larger than his fist. But it was not made of any material he recognized. It looked like crystal, but it glowed with a soft inner light. When he touched it, he felt a strange warmth, as if something inside was still alive after all these centuries. "What have we found?" his assistant asked, leaning over his shoulder. Yusu shook his head slowly. "I have no idea." He sent the stone to the university. From there, it traveled to research labs around the world. Scientists examined it with every tool they had. They scanned it, X-rayed it, and bombarded it with particles. What they found made no sense. The stone was not from Earth. It contained information. Complex, layered data encoded at the molecular level. And buried within that data were coordinates, a location somewhere in the galaxy, along with a message in a language that had never existed on this planet. It took humanity's best xenolinguists 3 years to decode the message. When they finally understood it, the world went silent. to the warm ones of the blue world. You showed us kindness when we had nothing to offer. You gave us hope when we had lost everything. Should you ever reach the stars, find us at these coordinates. We will remember what you have done. We will welcome you as family." The message was 3,000 years old. 80 years had passed since humanity first left Earth. They had built colonies on distant worlds. They had developed faster than light travel. They had joined the Galactic Concord, a vast coalition of over 200 intelligent species that stretched across the galaxy. But humanity was not important in the Concord. They were young. Their technology was generations behind the elder races. Their colonies occupied poor systems that no one else wanted. When human ambassadors spoke in the great halls of the Concord, the other species barely listened. Humans were tolerated. They were not respected. Consul Adara Mensa understood this better than anyone. She had spent 20 years representing humanity in the Concord. She had fought for every small advantage, every minor concession. She had watched elder species dismiss human concerns with casual contempt. When she received the news about the Memory Stone, she felt something she had not felt in years: hope. The coordinates pointed to a system deep in a region called the Dead Expanse. It was forbidden space. The Concord had declared it off-limits centuries ago after a powerful empire called the Dominion of Shar conquered everything within it. Adara requested permission to send an expedition. The Concord's ruling council, the Tribunal, refused. "The Velith are extinct," the Archon of the Tribunal declared. His species had multiple eyes that blinked in sequence when he spoke. The Dominion destroyed them long ago. There is nothing to find. But the message, Adara began, is ancient history. The Dominion controls that region now. We have no interest in provoking them over a dead species and an old stone. Adara did not give up. She spent months gathering information. She bribed, threatened, and called in every favor she had earned in 2 decades. And finally, she found the truth. The Velith were not extinct. They were slaves. The Dominion of Shar had not destroyed the Velith. They had conquered them. For 800 years, the crystalline beings had been kept in breeding facilities, their bodies harvested for the valuable minerals they produced. They were property. They were livestock. They were tortured and used and discarded when they broke. And the Concord knew. The great coalition of civilized species, the guardians of justice and order in the galaxy, knew that an entire race was being kept in slavery. They knew, and they did nothing. Adara stood before the tribunal again, her voice shaking with rage. "You told me the Velith were dead, but they are alive. 12,000 of them are alive right now, suffering in Dominion camps. Why did you lie to me?" The Archon's many eyes fixed on her without sympathy. "We did not lie. We simplified. The Velith situation is complicated. The Dominion is powerful. A war with them would cost millions of lives across hundreds of worlds. The Concord cannot sacrifice so much for so few. So you abandoned them. We made a strategic decision. One primitive species is not worth destabilizing the entire galaxy." Adara felt cold fury settle in her chest. "Those primitives saved my ancestors 3,000 years ago. They could have taken what they needed by force. Instead, they asked. They were kind. And now they have suffered for 8 centuries while you did nothing." The Archon leaned forward. "And what do you propose, Consul Mensa?" "That humanity, with its 12 colony worlds in its outdated fleet, goes to war with the Dominion of Shar. They control 40 systems. They have weapons that could crack planets. Your species would be erased in a month." "Perhaps," Adara said quietly. "But at least we would have tried." She returned to Earth with records, testimonies, and evidence. She presented everything to the United Nations Stellar Council. The leaders of humanity watched footage of Velith prisoners being broken apart for their crystals. They listened to intercepted transmissions prayers, repeated for centuries, calling out to the warm ones from the blue world. The Velith remembered. After 3,000 years of silence, after 800 years of torture, they still believed that the humans would come. The debate lasted for weeks. Military experts explained that victory was impossible. Economists calculated the cost of war. Diplomats warned that the Concord would abandon humanity completely. But something had changed. The memory stone sat in a museum in Geneva now, surrounded by guards and glass. But images of it had spread across every human world. The story of the ancient Velith and the village by the sea had become legend. Children learned about Myra, the little girl who had comforted a dying alien. Adults wept at the message encoded in crystal. Find us. We will remember. Humanity had spent 80 years trying to earn the galaxy's respect through trade and diplomacy. They had followed the rules. They had accepted their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Now they were being asked to choose safety or honor. Survival or memory. Admiral Chen Wei-lin addressed the Stellar Council on the final day of debate. She was 60 years old, a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts, and she did not waste words. The Concord tells us we are young and weak. They are right. The Dominion could destroy us. They are right about that too. But our ancestors were even weaker 3,000 years ago. They were farmers and fishers with bronze tools and wooden ships. And when strangers came from the sky, those ancestors did not hide. They did not attack. They helped. She paused, letting the silence build. The Velith left us coordinates because they believed in us. They believed that the species who showed them kindness would one day reach the stars. They have been waiting for 3,000 years. They have been praying to us for 800. I will not let them pray to silence. The vote was close. But when the final count came, humanity had made its choice. They would go to war. The Concord responded immediately. All support was withdrawn. Trade agreements were canceled. Humanity was formally censured and declared reckless. The Archon of the Tribunal issued a public statement. Whatever happened next, humanity had brought upon itself. Adara Mensa stood at the window of her office and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, in the darkness of the dead expanse, 12,000 Velith were waiting for help that had been promised 3 millennia ago. Humanity was coming, and the galaxy would learn what humans did for those who had shown them kindness. 10 years after the liberation. New Eden bloomed. Where human cities had once stood, great crystal spires now reached toward the sky. The Velith had rebuilt their civilization from nothing, creating structures of breathtaking beauty that caught the sunlight and scattered it into endless rainbows. Human visitors came from across the galaxy to see these wonders, and they were always welcome. The two species had become inseparable. Human engineers worked alongside Velith scientists, combining their knowledge to create technologies neither could have developed alone. Velith artists collaborated with human musicians, blending crystalline harmonies with organic rhythms. Children of both species played together, in parks that mixed grass and crystal in impossible gardens. On the anniversary of the liberation, a great ceremony was held on New Eden. Leaders from across human space attended, along with representatives from the Velith, the Concord, and dozens of other species. But the most important guests were not politicians or diplomats. They were the descendants of Myra. Genetic records had been traced, family trees reconstructed. Against all odds, scientists had found living descendants of the little girl who had comforted Toracel in his final hours. There were 47 of them, spread across Earth and the colonies, most of them unaware of their connection to history until recently. They stood now in a place of honor, watching as Salaithvarn approached the podium. 3,000 years ago, she began. A child showed kindness to a dying stranger. She did not know that her small act would echo across the ages. She did not know that her descendants would one day be honored by beings from the stars. She simply saw someone in pain and tried to help. Scyllaethvarn gestured, and a hologram appeared, a reconstruction of Myra based on the Memory Stone's records. A young girl with dark hair and bright eyes, holding flowers in her small hands. This is Myra. We do not know much about her life. We know that she kept the Memory Stone until she died. We know that she must have told stories about the crystal beings from the sky, because those stories survived in her village for generations after her death. But most importantly, we know that she was kind. The Veleth Elder looked at Myra's descendants, her crystal form glowing with warmth. You carry her blood. You carry her legacy. And through you, her kindness lives on. On behalf of all Veleth, everywhere and forever, thank you. One of Myra's descendants, a young woman named Elena, stepped forward. She was trembling, overwhelmed by the moment. She had been a schoolteacher a year ago, living a quiet life. Now she was standing before the assembled powers of the galaxy. I didn't do anything, she said quietly. Myra did. 3,000 years ago. Scyllaethvarn smiled, an expression the Veleth had learned from humans. But you are here. You exist. You are proof that kindness survives. That is enough. Elena nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. What happens now? Now, Scyllaethvarn said, we build the future together. And they did that 20 years after the liberation. The alliance between humanity and the Veleth had transformed the galaxy. Their combined technologies were decades ahead of anything else in the Concord. Their joint fleets patrolled the spaceways, protecting the weak and defending the helpless. Their example inspired other species to question the cold calculations that had governed galactic politics for millennia. The Dominion of Shar had been dismantled. Its conquered peoples were free. The regime that had tortured the Veleth for 8 centuries was gone, replaced by a fragile democracy that humanity and the Veleth were helping to nurture. The Concord itself was changing. More species were voting with humanity now, supporting proposals that prioritized justice over convenience, compassion over profit. The old ways were dying, slowly but surely died, and in the great archives of the Veleth, the memory archive continued to grow. Every act of human kindness was recorded. Every story, every song, every moment of connection between beings. The archive had expanded beyond humanity. Now it included the kindnesses of every species that chose to contribute. It was becoming something unprecedented, a monument not to power or conquest, but to compassion. Consul Adara Mensa, now old and gray, visited New Eden one final time. She walked through gardens of crystal and grass, accompanied by Scyllaethvarn and a dozen others who had become her friends over the decades. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if my ancestors had refused to help? Scyllaethvarn considered the question. We would have died. Our ship would have fallen from your sky, and we would have become nothing more than a strange legend. Your people would have developed alone, joined the Concord alone, and the galaxy would never have known what humanity was truly capable of. One choice, Adara mused. One moment of kindness. That is how history is made, Scyllaethvarn agreed. Not by the great sweep of armies, but by the small decisions of ordinary people. A villager who offers food to a stranger. A child who comforts a dying elder. These are the moments that change everything. They stopped at a memorial, a statue of Myra, rendered in crystal and bronze, standing with her hand extended in welcome. At her feet, flowers grew in an eternal garden. We've changed the galaxy, Adara said. Because of her. Yes, Scyllaethvarn said. And the galaxy will remember. Forever. 100 years after the liberation, the son of the Veleth, Homeworld had been dead for 3,100 years. The Dominion of Shar was a distant memory. Even the Concord had evolved into something new and different. But the memory archive endured. It had grown to encompass the histories of 1,000 species, all recorded in eternal crystal. It contained more knowledge than any single mind could comprehend. And at its heart, preserved in perfect detail, was the story of a little girl who had shown kindness to aliens in need. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it. They walked through halls of light and memory, experiencing the joys and sorrows of beings who had lived and died across uncountable years. They emerged changed, reminded of what truly mattered in a universe that was often cold and uncaring. And every visitor, no matter what species they belonged to, learned the same lesson. Kindness matters. Kindness echoes. Kindness survives. The universe was vast and old and indifferent. Stars were born and died without noticing the beings that lived in their light. Empires rose and fell, leaving nothing but dust. But somewhere, in a crystal archive that would outlast suns, the memory of a Bronze Age girl comforting a dying alien would endure until the end of time, because humanity never forgot. Kindness. And the reprisal gift was making sure the universe never forgot either. On the memorial statue's base, an inscription glowed in letters of light, words that have become the motto of the Human-Velith Alliance. Repeated by schoolchildren across 1,000 worlds. We remember. We repay. We endure. The stars continued their ancient dance, cold and silent and beautiful. And among them, carried on ships of metal and crystal, the descendants of farmers and fishers and little girls with flowers built a civilization worthy of the kindness that had started it all. 3,000 years ago, strangers met on a small blue world. One offered help. The other accepted with gratitude. And from that single act of compassion, an entire galaxy was transformed. This is the story of humanity. This is why the stars remembered their name. The refugee ships arrived at New Eden 3 months after the liberation. New Eden was one of humanity's oldest colonies, a green world of rolling hills and gentle oceans. It had taken humanity 60 years to terraform it, to turn its barren rocks into fertile soil. It was precious. It was home to 12 million people. And humanity gave it to the Velith. The announcement shocked the galaxy. Species did not give away worlds. Resources were everything. Planets that could support life were rare and valuable beyond measure. To surrender such a prize to alien strangers was unthinkable. But humanity did not think like other species. The colonists of New Eden were given 1 year to relocate. The government offered them new homes on other worlds, compensation for their losses, and help rebuilding their lives. Many were angry. Many protested. But when they saw the Velith arriving dim and broken, barely alive after centuries of torture, the anger faded. These were the beings their ancestors had helped 3,000 years ago. These were the beings who had left behind a message of hope, waiting for humanity to find them. How could they refuse them now? The first Velith to step onto New Eden soil was an elder named Korithval. She had been born in the camps. She had never known freedom. Her crystalline form was cracked and scarred from decades of harvesting. When her feet touched the real grass, growing wild under an open sky, she fell to her knees and wept. Human volunteers surrounded her, offering water and shade, even though they did not know if Velith needed such things. They simply wanted to help. They wanted to show these broken beings that kindness still existed in the universe. Over the following months, more worlds were offered. 3 human colonies in total were given to the Velith. Rich worlds, fertile worlds, worlds that humanity had fought and bled to claim. The gift was unconditional. No payment was expected. No alliance was demanded. Why? The Concord asked, genuinely confused. What do you gain from this? Consul Adara Mensa answered them with a question of her own. What did our ancestors gain when they helped the Velith 3,000 years ago? They gave freely because someone needed help. We are doing the same. The Concord did not understand. They never would. 5 years passed. The Velith slowly recovered. Their numbers grew as new generations were born in freedom. Their crystal forms began to glow brighter as they healed from centuries of trauma. They learned to live again, to hope again, to create art and music and stories that had been forbidden under Dominion rule, and they prepared a gift dot in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord. Representatives from 200 species gathered for the annual assembly. It was normally a tedious affair, filled with trade disputes and border negotiations. But this year was different. The Velith had requested permission to address the assembly. It was the first time they had spoken publicly since their liberation. Salethvarn stood before the gathered species. She was young by Velith standards, only 300 years old, but she carried herself with ancient dignity. Her crystalline form blazed with inner light, healthy and strong after 5 years of freedom. "I wish to tell you a story," she said. Her voice resonated through the hall like music. "It is a story my people have told for 3,000 years, passed down through generations even in our darkest times." The assembly fell silent. "Long ago, when our sun was dying, my ancestors fled across the stars. Their ship was damaged. They were dying. They found a small blue world inhabited by primitive creatures who had barely learned to farm the land. Images appeared above her, reconstructed from the memory stone, showing the ancient Velithark ship descending through clouds toward a Bronze Age village. My ancestors could have taken what they needed by force. These creatures could not have stopped them. But they chose not to. They chose to ask. And the creatures humans, they are called now, gave freely. They shared their food. They dug in the earth to find the minerals we needed. They showed us kindness when they had every reason to fear us." She paused, her light flickering with emotion. "One of our elders was injured. He was dying. A small human child sat with him through his final days. She brought him flowers. She sang to him. She held his hand as his light faded. He did not die alone because of her." Across the hall, several species shifted uncomfortably. They knew what was coming. We left behind a memory stone. We promised that if the humans ever reached the stars, we would welcome them. We believed they would come. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We never stopped believing, even when the Dominion took us, even when they harvested our bodies for 800 years, even when we forgot what sunlight looked like. We remembered the warm ones from the blue world. We remembered their kindness, and we prayed that they would find us." She raised her head, and her light blazed brilliant. They came. The hall was utterly silent. Humanity went to war for us. Not for territory. Not for resources. Not for power. They went to war because 3,000 years ago, their ancestors shared bread with strangers. They sacrificed thousands of their own people to free beings they had never met. And when we were free, they gave us worlds, their homes, asking nothing in return. She turned slowly, looking at each species in turn. "You told them it was madness. You abandoned them. You said they were throwing away their civilization for a debt that was ancient history. But you were wrong. Humans do not forget kindness. They do not abandon those who need them. They keep their promises, even across millennia." From beneath her robes, Salethvarn produced an object. It was a crystal, larger than the original memory stone, glowing with rainbow light. "We have spent 5 years creating this gift for humanity. It is a memory archive. Inside it, we have preserved everything that makes humanity what they are. Every song they have ever sung. Every story they have ever told. Every act of kindness ever recorded. Their art, their history, their dreams, their hopes, all of it, Encoded at the molecular level, preserved for eternity. She held the crystal high. Stars die. Civilizations fall. But this will endure. Long after humanity's sun goes dark, long after their worlds are dust, the galaxy will remember who they were and what they did. They gave us planets. We give them immortality. The hall erupted in murmurs, but Salaithvarn was not finished. I have one more thing to say. To the Concord, to the Tribunal, to all the species who watched our suffering and did nothing. You measured humanity and found them small. You saw their primitive ships and their young civilization, and you dismissed them as insignificant. But you measured the wrong things. Our voice rose, filling the great hall. Humanity is not great because of their technology or their military might. They are great because of their hearts. They are great because they remember kindness and repay it across generations. They are great because when the galaxy abandoned the weak, they stood alone and fought. She lowered her voice again, but it carried to every corner. My people owe our existence to a little girl who held a dying elder's hand 3,000 years ago. Think about that. All of us, every Veleth alive today, we exist because of one small act of compassion. That is the power of kindness. That is what humanity represents. And that is why, from this day forward, the Veleth will stand with humanity forever. She placed the memory archive on the podium. This is our reprisal gift. May it remind the galaxy, for all time, that some species are worth remembering. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Then, slowly, the representatives began to stand. First one, then another, then dozens. Species that had mocked humanity, species that had abandoned them, species that had declared them fools, all of them rose. They were not applauding. They were not cheering. They were acknowledging. Humanity had proven something that no amount of military victory could demonstrate. They had shown the galaxy what they truly were. Not conquerors, not exploiters, but keepers of memory, honorers of debts, protectors of the helpless dot in the aftermath of the assembly. The tribunal voted unanimously to grant humanity a permanent seat on the ruling council. Not because they had won a war, not because they were powerful, because they were worthy. The coordinates had waited 3,000 years. Humanity had never forgotten. And now, neither would the stars. The fleet gathered above Earth. 342 ships hung in the darkness, their hulls catching the light of the sun. They were not beautiful vessels. They were not elegant or advanced. Compared to the gleaming warships of the elder races, humanity's fleet looked rough and primitive metal boxes, bolted together with determination and hope. But every ship was crewed by volunteers. When the call went out, humanity answered. Soldiers who had retired decades ago reported for duty. Young people who had never held a weapon signed up by the millions. Scientists, engineers, doctors, and pilots all offered their skills. The colonial governments, spread across 12 worlds, emptied their treasuries to fund the expedition. No one had ordered them to fight. No law compelled them to sacrifice. They came because they understood something that the Concord never would. Some debts cannot be measured in credits or resources. Some promises must be kept, no matter the cost. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin stood on the bridge of the flagship Remembrance and looked out at her fleet. She was not a sentimental woman. She had sent soldiers to their deaths before. She knew what war meant. But this was different. This was not a war for territory or power. This was a war for memory, for honor, for a promise made 3,000 years ago by people who had nothing but their kindness to give. Admiral, her communications officer, said, "We're receiving a transmission from the Concord." Chum nodded. "Put it through." The Archon of the Tribunal appeared on the screen. His multiple eyes studied her with cold calculation. "Admiral Chun, this is your final warning. The Concord will not assist humanity in this foolish venture. If you proceed, you will face the Dominion alone. Your species will be destroyed. Is this truly what you want? Chun smiled slightly. With respect, Archon, you misunderstand us. We are not asking for your help. We are not asking for your permission. We are going to free the Velith because it is the right thing to do. What you choose to do about that is your own affair. The Archon's eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of frustration in his species. You are throwing away your civilization for a species you have never met, for a debt that was incurred before your ancestors could write. This is madness. No, Chum said quietly. This is humanity. She cut the transmission. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, and Earth vanished behind them. The journey to the dead expanse took 3 weeks. During that time, Chun studied everything humanity knew about the Dominion of Shar. They were a warrior species, reptilian and cold-blooded in more ways than one. They believed that strength was the only virtue that mattered. They had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved countless species. They expected resistance to crumble before their superior firepower. They had never fought humans before. Chun gathered her senior officers in the war room. Holographic maps floated in the air, showing the Dominion's defensive positions, fleet deployments, and the location of the Velith camps. We cannot win a direct confrontation, she said bluntly. They have 8 times our numbers and weapons that outclass ours in every category. If we meet them head-on, we will be destroyed in hours. Then how do we win? Captain Rodriguez asked. Chun's smile was thin and dangerous. We don't fight like they expect. We don't fight like any species they've encountered. We fight like humans. The plan was unconventional. It relied on speed, surprise, and a willingness to take losses that would break any other fleet. It required soldiers who would advance into certain death and pilots who would crash their ships into enemy vessels rather than retreat. It required people who believed so deeply in their cause that survival was secondary. I won't lie to you, Chum told her fleet before the first engagement. Many of us will not return home. The Dominion is stronger than us in every measurable way. But strength is not everything. Will matters. Purpose matters. We are here because 3,000 years ago, strangers were kind to our ancestors. We are here because those strangers are suffering right now, and they have been waiting for us to come. We will not fail them. We cannot fail them. Whatever happens in the battles ahead, remember why we fight. Remember who we fight for. The first strike hit the Dominion completely by surprise. Human ships dropped out of faster-than-light speed directly inside their defensive perimeter, a maneuver so dangerous that no sane species would attempt it. 3 ships were destroyed in the emergence, torn apart by gravitational forces. But the others opened fire immediately, targeting fuel depots and communication relays. The Dominion scrambled to respond, but the humans were already gone, jumping to the next target before the enemy could organize a counterattack. For 6 months, the war was a series of raids. Human ships appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished. They targeted supply lines, isolated patrols, and undefended stations. They never stayed long enough for the Dominion to bring its full strength to bear. The Dominion commanders were confused. This was not how wars were fought. Wars were about territory, about holding ground and advancing lines. But the humans held nothing. They claimed nothing. They simply attacked and retreated, bleeding the Dominion slowly. They fight like insects, one Dominion general complained. Annoying but insignificant. He was wrong about the insignificant part. After 8 months, humanity made its move. The Dominion had concentrated its fleet to guard its core worlds, certain that the humans would eventually have to attack there. But Chun had no interest in their core worlds. She only cared about the Velith, while the Dominion's main fleet waited in the wrong place. 300 human ships descended on Velithor Prime, the world where the Velith were held captive. The battle was brutal. The Dominion garrison fought hard, but they were outnumbered for the first time in the war. Human soldiers landed on the surface and advanced toward the camps. They found horrors beyond imagination. The Velith were kept in great dark buildings, their crystalline bodies dim and cracked. They were chained to machines that slowly drained them of their essence. Many had not seen sunlight in centuries. They had forgotten what freedom meant. When the human soldiers broke through the gates, the Velith did not understand at first. They flinched away from these strange soft-skinned beings, expecting pain. But the humans did not bring pain. A young sergeant named Maria Santos was the first to enter the main holding facility. She found thousands of Velith huddled in the darkness, their forms barely glowing. She knelt down beside one of them, a small one, perhaps a child by Velith standards, and gently took its hand. "It's okay," she said softly, even though she knew the Velith could not understand her words. "We've come to take you home. You're safe now." The Velith looked at her with eyes that had seen only cruelty for generations. And something in Maria's tone, in her gentle touch, must have translated across the gulf between species. The small Velith began to glow brighter. Word spread through the camps. The warm ones had come. The prayers had been answered. 3,000 years of waiting, 800 years of suffering, and finally, the humans had arrived. The Dominion threw everything it had at Velithor Prime, but it was too late. The human fleet held them off long enough for the evacuation. 11,342 Velith were loaded onto transport ships. Many were too weak to move on their own. Human soldiers carried them, cradled them, treated them with such gentleness that the Velith wept tears of liquid crystal. When the last transport was away, Admiral Chun ordered the fleet to retreat. They had taken terrible losses, nearly a third of their ships destroyed, tens of thousands of soldiers dead. But they had done what they came to do. The Velith were free. The war continued for 6 more months, but the Dominion's heart was no longer in it. They had lost their most valuable asset, and the cost of hunting down the human fleet was too high. When they finally offered surrender, it was not to the Concord, it was to humanity. Admiral Chun accepted their surrender on the Bridge of the Remembrance, surrounded by the battered remains of her fleet. The Dominion Emperor knelt before her, scales gray with shame. "You have defeated us," he said. "I do not understand how. You are weak. Your technology is primitive. How did you prevail?" Chun looked at him for a long moment. "You thought strength was all that mattered," she said. "But you were wrong. We did not fight for power or territory. We fought for people we had never met, because our ancestors were kind to them 3,000 years ago. That is something you will never understand. And that is why you lost. Humanity had done the impossible. They had challenged an empire and won. Not through superior firepower, but through superior purpose. And across the galaxy, every species watched and wondered what kind of creatures these humans truly were.